Hi, welcome to DTKSS. In this current session, we are going to discuss about Azure Data Factory. So this is a introduction session about the Azure Data Factory, and now in this session, we'll talk about what is Azure Data Factory and how the Data Factory will works, and demo on how we can integrate the multiple services in using the Data Factory. So Data Factory is a cloud data integration service used to compose the data storage, movement, and processing services into automated data pipelines. So how the data factory will works is, for example, a scenario that we have an application where the front end, all the people can access that system. Whatever that they are submitting the data, it will be stored into the blob container into the CSV format. So now we have one more system called backend system, which is consume the data using the Azure SQL. So we want to create the sync between this particular blob container and the Azure SQL. So whatever the data we are raising in this blob container, we want to transform to this Azure SQL. So how we can achieve is using the ADF copy data service. So when you are using this particular service, we have to link up those services using the blob container should link to the ADF, and Azure Data Factory also should link to the ADF. Then it can help to transform the data from the blob container to the Azure SQL. So I will show in a demo how we can achieve that. And one more scenario is, for example, you want to create a automated trigger. For example, this is called the input blob container and this is the output blob container. When there is a blob is created or deleted, certain actions to be performed at this particular blob also. So how we can achieve is using the blob container trigger, we can achieve that when there is a blob is created, automatically this particular blob data, whatever the file has created here, will push to this output blob container using this ADF. So in order to show that what is the scenarios we talk about it, I will switch back to the Azure portal. So first we'll create a resource group. So name it as D2KSS and I choose the region is East US and review and create. Perfect. Now we have created a resources. In this demo, what we have to create is first we create the blob container. So first we have to create this blob container. So I'll go back to this create button. Under the marketplace, I will choose a storage account and I'll create this storage account. So in order to that, I will choose the resource group is D2KSS and the storage account name is D2KSS storage account, and standard I will choose redundancy is local. Advanced, just keep the default settings as it is and click on review and create button. In parallel, you can go back to this particular portal again. So the deployment will take a while. So in parallel to that, I'll go to the resource group and I will create a SQL database. So second thing is we have to create one more SQL database. So go to the SQL database and here enter that D2KSSDB, and so we don't have any server, so I want to create a server, so I will call this as a D2KSS server. Right, then here you can choose the authentication method. In this demo I will choose this SQL authentication and I will give the name is D2KSS admin and password. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then click OK. Here the workload environment. So the workload environment which we are creating here is for development, and also here computed plus storage. So based on the requirement, what is the capacity you need, based on that you can able to choose. So this is most budget friendly general purpose. So but for this demo I will use this basic for less demanding workloads. So I'll just choose 2 and just continue to next, and I will use the public endpoint. Allow the Azure services and resources to access to this server, because we want to Azure ADF to be access this server. I'm check this option to yes and add the current IP address to this rule. Add the current client IP address. So when you click yes, it will automatically create a rule to add this public this client IP address into that rule. Allow the access to this server. So then click on the security, just choose the default and tags, review and create. So deployment is initiated, so it will take a while. So parallel will go back to this D2K SS storage account. So deployment is completed successfully. So now what we have to do is create a container and click on the container and choose that as an input. So the container name is input and click on the create button. Perfect. So now we have created a blob. So upload this file. So I have created a sample file, name it as emp.csv. So employee records I'm uploading. So I have uploaded, and select this file and click on that view or edit. So here I have choose that some test data which we want to process this particular data to the Azure SQL. So this is in a CSV format, and this particular data I want to move to this Azure SQL. Perfect. So now go back to this Azure SQL, check that if this deployment is completed or not. It is in progress. Perfect. The deployment is completed. Click on go to resource. So here under the main section you can able to see query editor preview. So click on it, and here it will ask you to enter the credentials. So enter the password which you have been choose in earlier steps. Click on OK. So now here it will list all the tables or views or store procedures which we have created for this particular DB. It will list, you can able to see here. So I want to create a table called create a table and name it as employee, and I will call this as employee ID integer and emp name varchar of 200 and salary decimal 18 comma 2 comma designation varchar of 500. Perfect. So click on run. So query is successfully completed. Now refresh. Under tables you can find a table called dbvo.employee. So from this container input container, we want to push this blob data emp.csv blob data to this table called dbvo.employee. So employee table we want to push the data. So how we can push the data is using this ADF service. So go back to this portal and create a new tab. So in this particular tab, what we are going to perform is we are going to create a data factory. So either you can able to choose from these services, or you can type that data factory. So data factories, you can choose that. Click on the create button and choose the resource group D2KSS, and instance name is I will name this as a D2KSS Data Factory, and I'll choose the default settings like a version v2. So it is validating the configuration. Click on create button. So the deployment will take a while. So the deployment is completed. Click on go to resource, and here you can click on this button launch studio. So we are launching Azure Data Factory Studio. Here you will contain the options is ingest. So copy the data at scale once, or schedule, or architect state. So code free data pipeline, and transform the data. So transform your data using the data flows. Configure SAS. So this data factory is similar to SAS. So in order to achieve the copying data from the blob container to Azure SQL, first we have to create a pipeline. So click on this service copy data. So this particular service is required two inputs. One is source, from where we want to copy the data, and where to copy the data. So for that we are going to create a data set. So input is coming from the Azure blob storage. You can select the Azure blob storage, and then what format we are getting the input files is delimited text in CSV format. Click on continue. So here you can copy this as a input CSV, and so we talk about that we need to create, or we need to link this particular service to ADF. So click on new. So here it will ask you to connect to this particular, or it will authorize to connect this blob is using the connection string or Azure keyword. In this example, I am using the connection string. From Azure subscription, I will choose the subscription, and choose the storage account, and test connection is we have to link that service. So click create button. So once you click on the create button, it will prompt you from which file path. So if there is a multiple containers in your storage account, so which container you want to copy the data. So browse and select that input container, and select the blob is emp.csv. So this particular emp.csv we want to copy the data. Perfect. So click on OK button. So now we have created a data set which reads the data from the blob and format it is as a data table. So now we create one more data set. So this is the destination, how we want to copy the data. So we want to copy the data into Azure SQL database. So click on Azure SQL database and name this as a output table. And link the service. So click on new button. So here you choose this subscription, and the server name is D2KSS server, which we created in our previous steps, and you can able to choose the database, which database you want to copy, and it will ask you to authentication types. So you can choose all the authentication types like a system assigned, managed, identity, or user assigned, or service principal. For this demo I am choosing this Azure SQL authentication. So I will enter that username D2KSS admin, and I will choose the password and create button. So it will ask you which table you want to copy. When you are linking this particular service, which table you want to copy the data. So click on OK. So now we have created two data sets. One is from CSV to read the data and format that as a data table, and this is also which we insert the data into the Azure table. Perfect. So we have created a pipeline. In this pipeline, we want to link that data sets what we created. We want to link it that. So source where we want to copy the data is from input CSV, and where we want to push that particular data is output table. So that is SQL table we want to push. Perfect. So you can import the schema. So when you get the schema, you can compare whether the default generated schema has mapped to correct fields or not. You can able to check here, and if the fields are mapped correctly, then you can proceed to run this particular pipeline. So here you will have this debug option. Either you can push, then you can able to run that, or before pushing you can first debug whether this particular configuration whatever we did the mapping is working or not. You can click on this debug button. So I have run this particular pipeline. So you can see the pipeline status is in progress, and it is queued copying the data. So success. So the data which we are taken from this blob, it has been copied to this particular table successfully. So how we can verify is, write a query, select star from employee. So click on run button. You can able to see that two records been inserted. Perfect. In this current session, we have covered the basics, how we can create the data sets and how we can create the pipelines and how we can transfer the data from the blob container to the Azure data table. But here one thing we must notice here is, in this data sets configuration, we have hard coded the data blob names or the table names. If we hard coded the blob name or table name, it will, if you want to create a or you want to copy the data of multiple data tables, you need to create the multiple pipelines, which is very difficult to maintain or which is very difficult to implement the lots of pipelines for each table. Instead of that, we can use the parameters to pass dynamically the table name and the blob name, so which makes the generic data sets or pipelines to copy that particular data to the destination data tables. I will show you in the next session how we can do that. Thank you.